Hey guys, welcome to this final video on our crate series. I'm going to go ahead and texture this asset, and I know we're inside of Max. If you already have your normal map and your AO, that's okay. Still, follow along. We're going to talk about a couple of extra little things in here to bake some extra maps to help you texture inside of Photoshop. And so I just want to talk about our settings real quick. Some things have changed inside of Max, and I just want to make sure that all your settings are proper for baking maps. So under Tools, Light Lister, first and foremost, make sure you have no lights. Delete them if you do. I then want to go to Rendering menu. Let's make sure that our gamma is turned off, so no gamma correction. I turn off Effect Color Selectors and Effect Material Editor as well while I'm here, and I say OK. Let's go under Rendering, Render Setup, or F10 on your keyboard, and make sure that we're in the scanline render and not Arnold. We're going to do this in scanline. We'll switch to Arnold here in a little bit to bake out a couple of other special maps, but let's just do scanline for now. Make sure you're on scanline. And I'm going to make sure Light Tracer is off for the moment. I don't want it to calculate any extra things while we're rendering our maps, so this should help it speed up a little bit, so turn off Light Tracer. And then let's set up something. Let's explode our mesh, and what that means is we're going to separate out all of our floating pieces that might accidentally bake onto each other. Like, we don't want our lid to bake onto our bottom crate, and we don't want these side planks to look dirty, so we're going to pull them out and separate them out so that they bake clean and there's no over baking or over baking on each other. And the way we can do that with our low poly, we're going to add an edit poly modifier on the stack. And I'm going to select my lid element. So I went to element, select my lid, and I'm going to right click on my move tool up here to bring up the transform type in. And I'm just going to move these up in nice whole round numbers. So I'm going to move the lid up on the z-axis by 100 units. I'm going to select the side plank, and I'm going to set this to -100. And I'm going to set this other side plank to +100. And those are all quote-unquote exploded now. So we have this layer, if you will, where these separate out from each other. We can turn that on and off at will. Now I'm going to hide my low poly real quick. I'm going to get access to my high poly crate. Turn off my wireframe so that this goes a little bit faster, but I'm going to add an edit poly modifier on the stack as well, and I'm doing this to all of my high poly pieces. It's worth noting that all my high poly pieces are detached, so everything here is a separate piece. So select them all, and then we're going to say edit poly modifier, put one on the stack. It's different than convert to editable poly. We're putting an edit poly modifier on the stack. I'm going to go select my elements, and we're going to select the top of this crate. You can go to your front viewport. I'm hitting F on your keyboard, and I'm just going to select all of these top elements here to isolate my lid, and then do a quick rotate around, make sure I don't have anything else selected. Okay, looks good. I'm going to do the same thing here where I move these up 100 units to match the low poly. So move it up on the z-axis by 100. Wait for it. Wait for it. And then do the same thing to the side planks that we did to the low poly. We're going to move these out 100. negative 100. Not 101, 100. There we go. And now you can see the high poly is also exploded. So unhide my low. And we're going to make sure that our bake to texture settings are all set up. We can start doing some test bakes here. It's also worth noting that before we go in and start baking all of these maps, make sure that you're using standard materials on all of these pieces. I don't want any physical materials, no Arnold materials. They should just be standard legacy materials. And I just have single solid colors on them. Okay, so 0 on a keyboard. Go to bake to texture. You can also find that under rendering, bake to texture. I'm going to add some render elements here. So we're going to say under this scanline rollout, we want to diffuse and we want our normal. And I'm going to say add. Let's make this box a little bit bigger. And since we're going to do a couple of test renders first, let's highlight both of these. Actually, first let's go ahead and add on the under the projected from. We're going to say pick from list. You want to make sure to pick all of your high poly. You can't pick it if it's not unhidden. So we're going to say add high poly, and it's going to put a projection modifier on our low poly here. There we go, and it also threw our cage out. Let's go ahead and solve that real quick. So element mode under that projection. Control A to select all of your cage. And then we're going to say reset under these cage options. Turn on shaded checkbox. I'm going to zoom in here so you can kind of see, and we want to make sure that our cage is pushed out so that all of our high poly is underneath that cage. This is how we include it in the projection. Okay, looks good. Let's set both of these maps here. I can highlight them both and say 512 render size. We're going to do a test. Turn my padding to 128. I'm going to change our PNG settings. We want to make sure that we're using a 24-bit PNG, no alpha channel. Say OK. Make sure you set your output. So I'm going to set my output. I have a special folder, but I'm just putting it under crate and then a textures folder, and then I have mine isolated into a demo texture set. I'm going to say select folder, and it looks like that's pretty much it. Let's go ahead and hit bake, do a test. Oh, it looks like we missed something here under normals. Make sure that you also have the normal element set to that same projection modifier. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off output into normal bump, because what that does is it tries to auto create a material for us. And I just don't want to deal with that. And let's do that test render again. Bake, and then I'm going to say overwrite those files. There we go, it looks better. We can click on this map over here to preview our textures. Looks good, that's kind of what I expected. We got this wild looking green thing here, but I think that's just padding. Nothing to worry about, but just in case that it's, just in case it's not something we do need to worry about, or just in case it's something that we need to check, let's go ahead and set up a little test to view our normal map in the scene here. So I'm actually going to clone my low poly. I'm going to select my low poly object, hold shift on my keyboard and move it out to the side, say copy, yep. I'm going to delete the projection modifier off of the copy. close that. I'm going to open up my material, and you can duplicate your standard material, your low poly standard material, by holding shift. And I'm going to load in a couple of maps here. First, let's make sure that under this standard material we go maps. We want to make sure that our bump is set to 100 instead of 30%. We want to set it to 100%. And then diffuse. We're going to drag out a rubber band, say general bitmap, browse to our diffuse here, so open that, and do the same thing except for our bump slot. We're going to do first normal bump, load in a normal bump slot, and then normal, load that bitmap, and then load that bitmap in here. And make sure that your material is on up here at the top. Show realistic material in viewport. Then let's apply it to our selected object. And aside from it looking rather low res, that is kind of what I expected. I don't see anything that looks really wrong. Okay, good. Worth noting, we go over to our plus menu in the viewport. I'm going to say configure viewports. Just make sure that your texture maps in here under display performance, texture map resolution is set to something that you're not going to go above. You can set it to 4096, or you can, set it to like over 9000. I don't know why this anti-aliasing is on. I'm gonna go ahead and turn that down and apply. Okay. Oh yeah, makes my viewport run a lot faster without that anti-aliasing. Okay. And so that looks good. So our test crate off to the side. So let's go back into our bake to texture, 0 on the keyboard, bake to texture. I'm going to change these. No, I kind of wanted to change the names, but I already set up my paths here for that material. Let's change these texture sizes to a 2048 because it looks like we're ready for our final test, or our final render. 2048. Let's make sure our normals are set up properly. You want to be on tangent. 3ds Max and Unreal are the same, but either one of those will be fine. And then let's turn on some high quality settings. So if we go into rendering, render setup, let's check that, yeah, light tracer is off. Go to the renderer tab. I'm going to change my filter to Catmull ROM. And then I'm going to say enable global super sampler. I'm going to turn it to max 2.5 star. And then close that. These are just high quality settings. Get a nice, clean, soft, yet sharp normal map. And then we're going to say bake. Let's go ahead and overwrite those. And there it goes. And this should auto update our material in the viewport, so we'll see it right as it's done. Boom, there it goes. Close that. And there's our final two maps. Now I do want to talk about a couple of other things that we're going to bake out here. We can be done with this. Really, I'm just going to turn off these render elements. So you see these little teapots here, you can turn both of those off. And then I'm going to go to rendering, render setup. And we're going to change the renderer to Arnold. We're going to render out a couple of Arnold maps here now. And close that. And over here under the Arnold rollout, let's see. we're gonna add, where'd it go? Ambient Occlusion. So let's add that Ambient Occlusion to our low poly. Add that one. Change the padding to 128 while we're here. Double check our PNG settings. Looks good. And we're going to set up a couple of extra maps. So I'm going to go to the material viewport, and I'm actually going to look for a utility map. There it is, utility. And I'm going to change this utility map to, I'm going to change a couple of things here. First, it's going to be we're going to say object, it's the OBJ. Then we're going to change it in here, it should say flat under shade mode. So color mode OBJ, shade mode flat. I'm kind of feeling like I want to duplicate this, so shift drag it. There's something else I was wanting to bake out. Yeah, let's go ahead and do an NG up here. Actually, it's NS. We're going to set that to NS, and then also flat. And I'm going to put in 2 extra maps in here. We're going to go to Arnold Override Map, and I'm going to add that. Add an override, add another override, so we're adding 2 of those. And highlight that first override. We're gonna, you have this little map slot down here underneath that override. We're gonna drag that first one. This is the NS map. We're gonna drag that into that slot and say instance, yes. You see that utility map is inside that first override element. And let's go ahead and change the name of this map to NS so that we don't forget. And I'm also going to set this second one, just drag the second one in here into that same map slot instance, yep. And we're going to change this one to object, just like that. Let's go ahead and set our padding as well. Yep. And let's go ahead and bake that out. So what you're seeing here is the AO, and we didn't do any settings for it, but it looks like it's okay. But we're going to talk about those AO settings as well. As soon as that's done saving, boom. Okay, so let's check that. Let's click these and see what they look like. That AO is a little soft. I want it a little bit darker. We'll change that. This is a world normal map. This will help us later. And let's click that object. And this is an object ID. Basically what it did is it took every individual high poly piece and gave it a random color, and this will help us in Photoshop for selecting things out. So that's nice. Let's close those and talk about the settings on our ambient occlusion here. Oh, gotta close that too. Okay. So Our ambient occlusion max distance here is set to 0. That means it kind of infinitely checks for shadows, which is okay. That could work for us. But let's actually take a look at what we can do to adjust that setting. If we go to, actually, if you look down on your bottom bar here, you have this down here at the bottom. It says grid equals 10. At least that's what it says in my case. And what that means is that each one of these little grid squares is 10 units. And so we can limit our AO. I'm going to set mine to 20 or possibly 30. You'll have to do a couple of tests to figure out what kind of AO you like. I like typically I like darker, softer shadows. I'm going to set that max distance to 30. And we're going to set our samples to something a bit higher. Like, this might be this might be overkill, but I'm going to do 128. And basically what this samples does is get rid of the graininess in our ambient occlusion. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit bake. And this is going to take a little bit longer because we upped our samples on that. But overwrite files, and I'm going to pause this while that's rendering. Okay, that's done. Let's take a look. So there's our AO, our high quality AO, and it looks a lot cleaner. It's not all grainy, so that's good. Close that. And there's one last map that I want to bake out, and we could do this two ways. I think I'm going to do it the scanline way. So I'm going to turn off these Arnold maps, and we're going to go render setup, and we're going to flip back to scanline, and we're going to set up a special gradient. Boom. I'm going to minimize these, and so for this, what you're going to do, I'm actually going to turn off that edible poly exploded layer on my high poly. And actually, let's go ahead and do it on our low poly too. Yep. There we go. I'll hide that low poly now. And I'm going to select all of this high poly. And we're going to put an unwrap on here. Not an unwrap UVW, I'm sorry, it's going to be a Uvw Map. Okay, Uvw Map. Let it load. That's what happens when you collapse your turbo smooths. Okay, and if you look close, I got this little orange box around it, and we're going to make that orange box, instead of it being kind of, I don't know, horizontally cut through, we want to switch that direction, change it to Y, so you see it's now going through it vertically. Yep. And I'm just gonna change that tile a little bit. We're going to say point, instead of 1.0, it's going to be 1.1, 1.1, 1.1. And basically that just made our gizmo, oh I'm sorry, that might have been wrong, right? Yeah, that didn't do anything. So put that back to 1. And instead, we're going to open up the UV map and highlight Gizmo, and I just want to scale this up just a little bit, really just a smidge, like that. Kind of keep it away from the edges of that box. Now under map channel, we're going to set this to lucky number 7. Map channel, lucky number 7. And then we're going to go into our material editor and we're going to make a new material. So standard, I'm going to create this new material. And in the diffuse slot, actually, you know, let's not even make a new material. Let's do it inside of this original material. So I'm gonna highlight my high poly wood. No, JJ can't make up his mind. Let's do another one. Second material, we're gonna call this G. I'm gonna name it material G for gradient. And under the diffuse slot, we're gonna add a gradient ramp, I think. Yeah, gradient ramp. And then on that gradient map ramp, there's also a map channel in here, and we're going to also change that to lucky number 7. And then let's set this material. Let's set it to all of our high poly. Assign. And you can see we have this gradient now across our crate, and that's what we wanted, except it's running the wrong direction. So on that gradient ramp node, we're going to set the W angle. So over here where it says W, we're going to set that angle to -90. And that'll turn our gradient for us. Or we could set it to +90 to put the white at the bottom, which is probably what I'm going to go with. Just like that. Close that. I'm going to unhide our low poly and get out of that gizmo. Get out of gizmo. Unhide that low poly. Go back to our bake to texture. If it wasn't minimized. And I'm going to add another, let's go back up the top, scanline render diffuse. We're going to add another diffuse map in here. Boom. Let's change these settings, 2048, padding of 128. And I'm going to change the name of this to crate gradient. And then, oh yeah, check our PNG settings. Yeah, good, still good. And then hit bake. And then close. Now, I probably should have saved this while I was doing all this in case it crashed. Let's go ahead and save our bake file. And I'm just going to pause real quick to get my bearings. Oh yeah, a couple more things. See, we're just kicking out. This is what I'm teaching you guys here is really how to get information out of a 3D program for texturing. We as texture artists leverage different sets of 3D information for texturing. And I'm thinking the last one, I mean, we covered this really with the world normal, and we'll talk about this when we get into Photoshop. But we can create a dirty version of a gradient, basically, where we select just our low poly, and I'm going to go to rendering, and there should be render surface map in here. Okay, and we're going to set this to 2048, 2048, and I want you to hit dust map. Boom. Then we got this gross looking low poly dust map. And I'm going to save that. You have to hit the little save button up here because it doesn't have an output. And then I'm going to set this to, I'm going to save it in here, call it crate underscore dust. And I'm gonna also set it to a PNG and save. 24-bit, no alpha, say okay. And I think we're done with that. The very last thing we're gonna do is put an unwrap UVW on our low poly. We're gonna open the UV editor window. We're gonna go to Tools, Render UVW Template, set the size here to 2048 by 2048. We're gonna uncheck Show Overlap and say Render. And we got this image of our unwrap. I'm gonna save that. We're gonna call this crate underscore UVW. Also make that a PNG. Save. And we're gonna do that again, except we're gonna uncheck visible edges and seams. We're gonna change the mode to solid, and we're gonna change that fill color to white. And say render again. And then we're going to save this. We'll call it crate underscore solid. We'll call it solid UVW. Or we could do UVW underscore solid. Bleh. Oh, there it is, PNG. Save. Okay. Now you have all your maps ready to go into Photoshop or another application if you want, but we're doing this in Photoshop. Let's close that. Get out of all that. Hit save. I'm going to close Max because we're done here. I'm going to launch Photoshop. I have my window floating here. There's all of our maps that we created. I know it's a lot, right? And I'm just going to look at these maps inside of Photoshop. So file open. Boom. Demo. I'm going to load all my maps, highlight them all, say open. If you're on a slower computer, you might not want to open them all at once. These are kind of large images. And we just opened up like 7 or 8 of them. And Control Tab will allow us to look at all these. There's all of our sets of information. So I think I'm gonna break this video. I'm gonna put a stop to this video, and we'll continue on in another video. But this is the initial steps to texturing your crate inside of Photoshop. Thanks for watching.